Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Daily Defender. Glad to be with everybody again. Glad you're tuning in. Glad you're taking some time out to see what our next content is or our latest content. So thank you very much for that. Really have to thank everybody also for all of the comments recently. Just some great comments, even going back to one of the top break videos that I had done. There was some great feedback on that. Number of really nice comments on the 6906 and some of the um, other semi-automatic Smith & Wesson videos that I've done. So really thank you for that. Really enjoy interacting with all of you in that manner. I really do like that. So thanks. Please keep the comments coming. Also, a big thank you to all the new subscribers. We continue to get new subscribers, so I'm glad you guys are liking the content and you think it's beneficial. But please continue to subscribe if you're watching the videos for the first time. It really helps us. Again, as I've said many times before, we really can't move the channel forward until we get certain criteria met. So please continue to like and send comments and subscribes, and we really appreciate all that. So kind of continuing into this semi-automatic, if you've seen the last half a dozen videos or so, we did a lot on the Smith & Wesson J-frames. That was a lot of fun. And then I moved back over into the semi-automatics, and I wanted to do that again, or maybe stay with a semi-automatic. And this time a second gen gun. And this one is going to be the 659. This is an all stainless steel gun, as you can see from the video here. And this is a really interesting firearm. I'm going to talk a little bit about its history and its sibling, the 459, but the history back to the 59, and even I think we need to talk a little bit about the double stack high capacity capability of this firearm and where that came from, and also tell you a little bit about how it shot. I shot it the other day and shot it side by side to a couple other Smiths, so we'll talk a little bit about that. But yeah, we'll get right into the deep dive. This is again the Smith & Wesson 659, and let's get into it. Right, so I just introduced, we want to talk about this model 659, Smith & Wesson 9mm, and this is a second generation firearm, right? So this is going to be one of the second generation semi-autos. And if you're not overly familiar with the generations or haven't seen some of my other videos, essentially Smith & Wesson produced these all metal, double action only for the most part, hammer fired guns in 3 generations, first, second, and third. And it ran from about, depending on when you start the clock, the early 50s to the mid 1950s with the first gen. The second gen guns were an 80s platform, and then the third gen guns basically started in the very late 80s, 88 and 89, and ran through the 90s and even into the early 2000s to mid 2000s, depending on the model number and maybe the particular law enforcement contract that they had, or they were still building firearms, but of course they were then moving to striker fired at that point, and for all the reasons we know, and Glock making the big splash into the law enforcement market at that time. But these firearms are, as you guys know from the channel, just wonderfully built, wonderful firearms, enjoyable firearms to own. Semi-collectible, I guess, in the sense that they don't really have the price tag of some high-end collectibles, but I think there is a very I want to say cult, but a high interest in these firearms, and I really enjoy them, and so that's why we want to continue to talk about them and continue to show them here on the channel. So, but as I said, this is a second generation firearm, as we already said, kind of a mid 80s, and maybe before we kind of jump into the deep dive, I think we do need to kind of go backwards a little bit, just to kind of touch base on not only its sibling, but what the first generation guns were doing and kind of how we get here to the 659, kind of almost from a historical perspective without writing a history book. But just real quick, we do have its sibling, the 459, and every firearm on this table is a clear and safe firearm. They've all have been checked prior to the video, but this is a 459, and so it's steel and aluminum, alloy frame sibling, obviously in a blued gun. And so these were the two full-size second-gen 9mm double stack firearms that Smith and Wesson would have been producing in the 1980s. But again, we have to kind of go backwards, I think, just a little bit and look at the first generation guns and maybe help understand where this platform came from or what Smith was trying to do with this. And if we kind of reach over to a 59, and again, a clear and safe firearm. But if we reach over to the 59, this is the first generation double stack 9mm. And obviously, the 459 and 659 are the next extensions of that. But if we go back just one other step further into the single stack 39, or in this case, the 39-2, and again, another clear and safe firearm, this is really where it all begins. And if you haven't seen my video on the 39, in this case a 39-2, please do, because it's just a really, really interesting firearm. One of my favorite firearms. What Smith & Wesson was doing with this early on in probably the late 40s and into the 50s, and then how it became not mainstream, but interested to the Navy SEALs in Vietnam, in the Illinois State Police, and kind of how this firearm kind of just take off and really kind of put its place in history. But really, this was a single stack 9, and I don't have all my notes in front of me, but basically my understanding was that the SEALs, while they were utilizing the 39 as the hush puppy in Vietnam, they were asking about a double stack, maybe looking towards a Browning high power style. And so they asked Smith & Wesson to produce several, and they do. I don't remember the exact number, but they built a number of prototypes, basically taking the 39 and making it a double stack 9mm. And you can't ignore the obvious that in 1971, I think it was, don't hold me to the exact date, I'll look it up, Smith & Wesson introduces the 59 as a double stack 9mm basically to the civilian market, or the law enforcement market. So just way too many similarities there to what the SEALs were asking for and what Smith & Wesson built for prototypes, and then in the 59 as a double stack 9mm, what made it to market. So just a little bit of maybe history there, if that's helpful for everybody, starting with the first gen guns and how that kind of all migrated through and evolved, and how we get to today in this particular video, the 659. So let's kind of do our traditional walk around. I mean, maybe the basics. It is a 9mm caliber pistol. These were 4-inch barrels. And as you can see, this is an all stainless steel firearm, and with basically plastic or nylon grip panels. And I'll talk a little bit about these as we go through the deep dive. And as I mentioned, they would have been supplied with a 14-round 9mm magazine, and we'll talk a little bit about the magazines as well and how that functions with this gun. But again, as we just kind of take our quick, walk around, again, and there's a lot of similarities, right, to the other things that Smith & Wesson is doing with their semi-autos and their first, second, and third gens. And as we always kind of just walk around these, I'll kind of point out the high points. Again, completely stainless steel firearm. It is 40 ounces, I should mention it. This is a 40-ounce firearm, and when you pick this firearm up, unloaded with the magazine in it, I should say, you feel the weight of this firearm. The 459, as a comparison, is about 30 ounces, and this is not a light gun, but it certainly feels relatively light, and of course is light when you pick up the 659 at 40 ounces, and it really does feel, even as some of the other third generation stainless steel semi-automatic firearms, almost that it's been kind of built out of a single block of stainless steel. It just has that density to it. But yeah, full stainless steel, this weight, etc. And as we kind of just walk around the firearm like we usually do, Smith & Wesson once again is producing a very nice firearm with a lot of very nice machining on the slide and the frame. But you can probably pick that up in the video, hopefully, that on the top and sides here, not on the full side, this is kind of definitely a polished stainless steel, but on the top you have this matte satin or brushed stainless, whatever you'd like to call it, and it's just very nicely done, right, as an anti-glare opposed to the very high gloss or shiny side. So that's just very nice, very traditional Smith & Wesson at this time. We have Smith & Wesson rolled stamp on the left side. We have the traditional Smith & Wesson information stamped in the slide. We do have rear serrations on both sides, which is very nice. We also have a dual or ambi, if you will, decocker safety, and we'll talk real briefly how that works if you haven't seen other videos. Just harking back for a second to the 59, this, or 459, I'm sorry, this is a very, very early version, 459. I think if my memory serves me right, this is a 1981 serial number, and that was the year that these came out. And interestingly enough, this one does not have an ambi decocker safety, so you can see they hadn't quite migrated to that yet with the where we get to the 659. And also very, very interesting, and hopefully that comes up on camera, there it is, a very interesting extractor, a wide, shorter, fatter extractor. And I'd have to check my notes on that, or you can check the video out that I did on this, but this is a very interesting part of this firearm. But again, just a comparison, a very early second gen double stack 9mm in this 459, opposed to more of a late model. And I know this is a late model for a couple reasons. One, the serial number gives it away. And these were produced from about 82 to 88, just again to give you that feel. These are definitely an 80s platform. But this particular version, I've marked it at about a 1986 or 87. So we're getting pretty close to the end of the production run, right? If we know they close out the production run in 88, and this is somewhere in a late 86, 87, we know this is definitely a later model second generation gun. The other thing that gives that away is the square trigger guard, right? We can see the square trigger guard here. This is a hallmark of the later production models, opposed to a rounded trigger guard here back to the 459, in which we know is a very early second generation gun in 1981. So you've got your rounded trigger guard, you've got your square trigger guard based on kind of the age in the product platform. So that those are two dead giveaways that we've got a later generation firearm. As we're kind of working down the frame here, we just talked about the square trigger guard. You do have these vertical front serrations, if you will. You also have checkering or serrations on the front of the trigger guard, very traditional for that time period. We have a mag release button, but only on the left side. Grip panels. Grip panels are nylon typically. In nature, production, or a material of construction. These are actually a matte finish, and I did buy these aftermarket. I was told that they are, original OEM Smith & Wesson grips. I haven't been able to verify that. I do know that the traditional grip panel that would have been supplied would have been this high gloss black. That is, you see here on this 459. Hopefully, I think that's coming up on camera. You can kind of see that high gloss, which I do like. I like it on this 459. It is identical, I think, to the 59, to the first generation grip panels as well. But I do know that Smith & Wesson did make a kind of a matte finish, and I found these, and I really like them, and I really sets well with this stainless steel material. I like it better than the gloss. I really do. I still have the gloss original side panels that came with it, but anyways, you can kind of see that there. Continuing to kind of just walk around, we've got a very nice beaver tail here, not too big, not too small, but it's a very nice sized beaver tail. The back strap is also vertically serrated, or with these vertical lines, whatever you care to call it. And it is kind of a three-piece grip. It's not three-piece, exchangeable back straps that we have today on current model firearms, but you have two grip panels, and you do have this rear back strap that if you remove the two panels and drop the pin out, the back strap will come out, and it'll expose the mainspring, etc., and some of the other components on the inside. So we have all of that. We don't really have a beveled mag well. We're really not to that point in Smith & Wesson engineering and production, but You have so we don't really have that. What else? It is obviously a double action, single action firearm, and traditional double action, as we'd call it. So it has a full hammer, as you can see, and this is a full size firearm. This is a full size duty firearm. This is not a compact or subcompact, as you can probably see in my hand by any stretch. On the right side of the firearm, at this stage, the second gen guns, when they do have the ambidextrous decocker safety, you can see it's placed in with a set screw. On the third gen guns, it's more of a pin and a spring, but you can kind of see that there. And on this side, it's basically kind of a sterile firearm, right? There's not much, there's really no markings other than the traditional small Smith & Wesson trademark stamp there. So not much on this side in terms of markings or stampings. This is the most, for this model, if you will, the most current style extractor, this long, thin style. If we look at this very early, as I mentioned, very early, there's that wide extractor again on the 459. This is a very, very traditional extractor here. We didn't really talk about the sights. The sights are, again, what you would typically expect for this generation firearm, in the sense that the front sight is a fixed sight. It's actually part of the slide. It is serrated, if you will, at the top, but it's fixed. There's nothing you can do with this other than maybe paint it. And it is larger than the first gen. If we pick up the 59, and hopefully that comes off on camera there. I don't know if it will. You can see that the 59, the blued gun, it definitely has a smaller front sight in terms of height, and then it's I'm not sure that really comes up on camera, but the 459, I'm sorry, the 659 in my right hand does have has a slightly wider front sight as well. So they increase that so you can get a little bit more front sight visibility to it. This particular model has the rear adjustable sights, and again, you may have seen these on other Smiths or other videos. It's an adjustable rear sight, all black. There's now 3-dot. It's not a Novak or anything like that. I actually like these sights. My eyes pick up the sights very well. I agree. Some people complain or talk about the front sight being silver, being a little difficult to pick up. I don't know if I particularly find that. But the silver against the black seems to work, and this big kind of, I don't know, bold rear sight with the ears and so forth, it just kind of works for me. Visually, it works for me. I really like it. I like the way it looks. Maybe it's a little old school. Of course, it is old school, but I mean, just that even in this age, kind of this big, eared or side panel rear sight, but I like it. I think it's kind of cool. What else can I tell you about it? These still a bushing design, right? So just like all the first gen guns, they do not move to a bushless design until barrel bushing, until the third gen guns. It is a stainless steel guide rod as well. We'll take one of these guns apart at one point. That'll be a fun video as well, or have it disassembled before we start the video, so we can talk about some of the internal parts. But I think that's basically all the major points that I wanted to talk about the 659. I'll tell you a little bit about how it shoots and what I like and dislike about it. Again, we already talked about the 14 round capacity 9mm mags. This is a Metgar mag. These very, very good mags. I think maybe Metgar was even making them for Smith & Wesson at some point, but an all metal firearm. This one actually has 15 noted in it, so this might be one of my rather newer magazines. I just have inserted here part of this 659 for the video, but they would have traditionally or standard would have come with a 14 shot. And if you're not familiar with these firearms, and again, we've already checked these ahead of the video, clear and safe firearm, just to cover this point off, actually 2 points. These firearms, the second gen, all the generations, I should say, had a magazine disconnect. So first gen, second gen, and third gen, none of the firearms work unless the magazine, the trigger, I should say, works. Well, the firearm doesn't work either unless the magazine is inserted into the firearm. So we have a magazine disconnect here. The other thing that the second gen guns had, before I forget, was a firing pin block. So effectively, it made the gun drop safe. And maybe that's an important point. I think I've talked about it in other videos, but if you own one of the first gen guns, whether you own a 39 or a 39-2 like this, or a 59 like this, they did not have that feature, and it's that safety feature. So I don't think anybody really considers the first gen guns drop safe. But by the time the 1980s roll around, that's an improvement that Smith & Wesson makes, and we do have a firing pin block safety, if you will, making the firearm drop safe. So, but just coming back to this magazine disconnect, so the firearm has to be, or the magazine has to be inserted into the firearm to enable the trigger to be pulled, and then at that point it is a long but semi-long. It really shouldn't say long. It's a very traditional, in my opinion, double action pull. It's heavy, but it's not overly long, but it's very smooth. So I'd put those three adjectives in: heavy, smooth, and but not overly long in the travel. And then the as almost all of the first, second, and third generation guns, the single action is very nice. It's a short take up if you weren't riding the reset, and then it's a very nice glass break kind of single action. Now the reset, as we've talked about before on almost every Smith & Wesson, although I'll make a comment in a minute on the 459, is very short and tactile, and you can hear it and you can feel it. You can hear it and feel it very easily, and it's very short, and you're right at that wall. As I've said in other videos, the reset and the single action on the Smith semi-autos, and it really doesn't matter which generation, is just excellent in my opinion. So that's the double action, single action, and again, without the magazine inserted, you don't have any trigger function at all. And again, just to cover that point off, if you haven't seen the other videos, that was basically a safety feature and a feature for law enforcement that effectively, if you were in a struggle or thought you were going to lose control of the firearm, you could drop the mag out of the firearm, rendering it useless. I seem to recall my time at the academy that there was a discussion as well that if there's a hostage situation, or your partner or somebody was taken hostage, that you could drop the mag out of your gun, rendering it ineffective and hopefully having a second backup firearm on you or what have you. So a number of different reasons or possibilities for this magazine disconnect, but it was definitely trigger disconnect, magazine disconnect, was all centered around law enforcement and safety. And I believe there are stories of that being utilized, and some police officers back in the day, swearing that did save their lives or did save officer lives. So kind of a unique feature. You don't really see it much anymore on firearms today. So I think that is kind of all of the high points that I wanted to tell you about this particular firearm. We've talked about the material of construction. We've talked about the weight, a lot of the features. What do I like about this gun? What do I don't like about this gun? And how did it shoot? Very, very little not to like about this gun. If you're a Smith & Wesson fan, if you're second gen, first gen, third gen fan, this is just an enjoyable firearm to own and shoot. The 40-ounce all stainless steel construction, as you can imagine, allows it to really just kind of soak up recoil. It's very, very easy to shoot 9mm. The detraction, I guess, could be the weight, and of course there's no rail, but that's not, the rail portion here, that's not it was not prevalent back in this time, right? And there's a lot of firearms that don't have rails, or certainly didn't have rails back in the day. So, that's I guess it could be one detraction. This is just a large, full size, very, very robust firearm, well made, well built, with excellent materials, very good engineering behind it. As I've said before, really all of these Smith & Wessons, generally speaking, first, second, and certainly the third generation guns are very, very well engineered. I will say, and I don't know the answer to this yet, I happened to shoot the 659 and the 459 side by side the other day, and the trigger on the 659 is considerably better really across the board, whether it's double action, single action, and even the reset. Now, there's certainly an age difference. Both guns were bought used, so we don't know the history. Um, Obviously, I've taken them apart and cleaned them and don't notice anything odd or um, unusual. There's no malfunctions in either firearm every time that I shoot it, and we didn't have any malfunctions when I shot it the other day. But the trigger on this particular 459, it's much longer pull on the DA, and there's almost no tactile feel on the reset. So there's definitely something different between these two firearms. I don't own enough of the second gen firearms to be able to kind of walk through what that might be if I owned a half a dozen of these or shot, a half a dozen different versions. Then maybe I could probably articulate. I haven't taken this one to a gunsmith to try to figure that out. Possibly a mainspring change, perhaps. That would certainly, in a different pound mainspring change, would certainly probably change that double action pull, and I may do that just to see what result I get. I can't speak to the reset. It's very unusual. None of the other Smith & Wesson semi-automatics that I own, first, second, or third gen, lack that very nice short tactical reset. The reset's there. It's not that it's not functioning, and it still has the same length. It's still a very short reset, but there's no tactile feel to it, and you can't hear it. So actually, if there's anybody who's a little bit more familiar with the second gen firearms, or maybe that particular aspect, the trigger reset aspect on the second gen guns, if you could comment on that, I would love to hear it. I really do like this firearm. The 459 has just got some great history, right? Again, if you haven't seen my other video on the 459, check it out, because the FBI connection and the 1986 Miami shootout. I know for a fact, two facts. One, there was also a government contract for the 459s beyond what the FBI was working with, and I have actually seen pictures of U.S. Army Special Forces back in the 80s in Central America utilizing these as well. So, I just think it has an amazing history to it. I would really like to actually get my trigger corrected, because I really do like the 459. As a lot of you guys know from other videos, I'm also a sucker for the blued firearms. I just love Smith & Wesson blued firearms, but really can't detract from this 659. This is very, very nice in its own regard, very pretty in the stainless steel. The frame has a little bit, we didn't really talk about that, but up here on the dust cover and so forth, down onto the trigger guard, this is kind of a satin finish through here. You can see, obviously, where it has this high gloss stainless here, but they did kind of put this, again, satin finish. I have to assume the same finish that was up here on the top, and it seems to be fairly robust. I thought this firearm was in excellent condition when I saw it, and then eventually purchased it. It has a nick and a scratch here and there, but that's okay. And again, its function has been flawless, and the trigger is phenomenal. So I just can't take anything away from this firearm. In fact, if I could almost import the trigger into the 459, yeah, again, just because I'm kind of a sucker for the 459 and the blued and the history to it, that'd probably make this firearm absolutely perfect. It is a little annoying to shoot this firearm with that trigger as I've described it, because I'm definitely expecting it to act a little bit more like the other Smith & Wesson semi-autos that I own. And again, no malfunctions with it. It functions completely fine, and it could have something to do with the age, the early 1981 first year production. Hard to say. But anyways, just an obvious fact or pickup point that I came across the other day when shooting them. And I thought I remembered that the last time I had shot both of these side by side, and my memory held true, and that the trigger on this 659 was very, very good. But again, I hope you guys like that video. I hope the information was useful. It's just another great piece of Smith & Wesson history and engineering. Again, with their semi-automatic double stack 9mm, and the stainless guns are very, very nice. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and we'll see you again next time very soon on the Daily Defender.